Hello, folks. Today I want to talk about 8 best practices for global patent portfolios, particularly in the context of hardware or hardware related technologies. Now, the path to market for a hardware product is a little more costly and regulatorily complex than software, which is what we often hear about. Now, in connection with hardware, you have things like underwriter lab certifications, FCC concerns, even regulatory medical issues if it's a medical device. So that the cliche from Silicon Valley of going fast and breaking stuff, frankly, it just doesn't work for certain categories of invention. Now, because of this delay between prototype development and market readiness, hardware devices are going to demand unique IP protection strategies that are a bit different from those used for less tangible technologies. Now, speed is of the essence in some categories of product, but strategic caution is recommended when you're dealing with hardware, and this strategic caution can lead to stronger and long-term more effective IP rights. When you're developing IP protection strategies for emerging hardware technologies, there are a few lessons. There's about 8 particular points, and I want to go over those today. If you follow this during the early lean years of product development, you stand a better chance of maximizing your revenue potential when you want to exit later or when you want to operate after regulatory approval is achieved. All right, number 1, do not file your U.S. non-provisional applications first. Most patentees file in the U.S. first. Now, this can be a mistake for products with a really long development cycle. Consider if you have a long road to market, beginning with a provisional application. Follow the provisional next by a patent cooperation treaty, a PCT application, and then you can file in your U.S. non-provisional stage afterwards, after collecting useful strategy information during the PCT process. The goal here is to delay protection while the technology matures to market readiness. Okay, if yours is a medical hardware device, don't forget the medical tourism countries. Now, high-tech patentees often focus on the US, the European Union, and larger Asian jurisdictions for patent protection. But for medical device patentees, there's some other markets that perhaps you need to prioritize. There are emerging markets in Central America, South America, the Middle East, Southeast Asia, all these markets that can be a hotbed of medical tourism. Now, many of these countries have particularly formal procedural requirements that make the patent process tricky. As we already mentioned, consider beginning your patent journey with a cost-effective PCT patent application to preserve your rights early in the process, preserving them early during product development, and as you develop increasing funding interest and have a little bit more breathing room along the same path, then you'll follow up with a PCT and national applications, and your patent application process will get more expensive. But ideally, you will have corresponding revenue growth as you get there. You can also file in these smaller markets and preserve your rights while the device is being used in actual procedures in non-FDA jurisdictions. And the data collected during this may also be helpful for FDA or for European regulatory approval. There's always a balance with medical hardware startups between protecting your hardware but also allowing freedom to iterate during regulatory review, doing medical studies, doing all the pre-approval processes that you have to go to that are unique to this specific type of technology. So, what I'm saying is an initial product rollout in a regulatorily less complex jurisdiction might be part of the balance, and by preserving your patent rights globally, you'll preserve your opportunity to make that choice later with a protected product, not an unprotected product. Again, this all goes back to filing a PCT application that affords innovators an option, not necessarily requires. You may walk away from that option, but it affords you an option to protect in initial jurisdictions that may be quite small and may be relatively unimportant long-term to your market, but at some stage in your development cycle, they're important right now. This also allows you flexibility as you may be receiving funds from investors all over the world and trying to identify your global market and where your market share will wind up landing once you get past all these hurdles and you're shipping product. Now also think about the manufacturing hubs. There may be jurisdictions with little natural market for the product. It may be because of a political issue related to difficulty enforcing patent rights. It may be just the nature of that market. It's a difficult market to operate in, but it's a great market to manufacture in. You might consider protecting things there, even though when you looked at a globe, you wouldn't presume there to be many revenue opportunities for ultimate end user sales. This is pretty common with hardware devices that where you're primarily selling or at least generating revenue and where you're manufacturing, they're different places. So again, operating under the protective umbrella of a PCT patent application until everything is more mature and you can make a decision. This allows you to protect in your home country, the country of your customers, the industrial locales favored by you and your competitors' manufacturing functions. And you don't have to figure that all out today. Okay, here's another idea. This will be the fourth one. Leverage jurisdictional arbitrage. Now, this is something that's a lot of fun for me as a patent attorney, but different jurisdictions examine patents with greater or lesser rigor. Yet, due to a global treaty framework, both the very rigorous examining jurisdictions and the less rigorous jurisdictions, they may enjoy similar reciprocal treatment under these treaties. There's a process called the patent prosecution highway. Many countries participate in this process. The way it works is that once the PCT patent application stage concludes, then you begin pursuing national rights in the territory of the different PCT signatories. Well, some of these territories may move very quickly, and you may get issued patents. Other places you may get rejected patents. Well, the way you can implement jurisdictional arbitrage is be very strategic in filing applications in jurisdictions where you think you're going to get issued patents fairly quickly. Then take that issued patent under the patent prosecution highway and take it to the patent office in slower and more difficult jurisdictions and say, hey, I've got a patent here. You are both members of the patent prosecution highway treaties. Please give deference to this grant in this other country. Now, they don't always have to, but very often that deference will indeed be granted. And as a component of that deference, you now also receive an issued patent in the slower jurisdiction much more quickly and with much broader claims than you might otherwise get. So this helps your pivoting process by selecting both rigorously examining and less rigorously examining jurisdictions, but both of which that honor the PPH treaties, and then under the PPH allow deference to be given to the patent granting decisions of whatever jurisdiction happens to be moving quickly. So the takeaway, don't just file applications in the rigorously examining jurisdictions where you're probably also going to have a significant market for consumer or other expensive hardware, but get a portfolio of quickly granting but weaker patents in some jurisdictions that may be less than ideal, and a portfolio of slowly granting strong patents in prime jurisdictions. This way you can balance enforcement demands, meet your capital raising goals, start some early licensing activity before you reach the finish line in your prime markets. Now, there's other types of technology where your product development life cycle is much quicker. And for those technologies, this may be unnecessarily complicated. But for hardware, and hardware with regulatory complexities, particularly consumer-facing or medical type hardware, This is a worthwhile strategy to think about. Okay, here's the fifth item. In some jurisdictions, maybe you don't want to pursue a patent. There are some alternative protection vehicles that can be very valuable. For instance, some European markets have something called a utility model. Now, a utility model registration is a quickly granting alternative to patents. It's a statutory right to exclude others from practicing an invention. It's very similar to a patent, except that a utility model is both easier to obtain and, on the downside, it's easier for a challenger to invalidate. Utility models register quickly. They're very often presumed valid until proven invalid by a challenger. And what they do is they provide an early first line of defense while more substantial utility patent rights are being developed. Now, much like the IP rights mentioned elsewhere in this piece, the process can begin with a provisional application in the US, followed by a PCT application, then followed by a decision on national stage entries of utility patent applications or entry of utility models. Now, because a utility model registration is presumed valid and enforceable until challenged, this means that an owner of such a registration can use it to seek licensing revenue even before your scope of IP rights is fully defined. And it's on the licensee to prove it invalid. So you have some settlement potential here nonetheless. Now, my sixth point is you can file in a lot of countries and then you can drop cases later. So maybe you file in a bunch of places and then as you get down the road, you realize some places are of less interest, where there's these ongoing annual maintenance fees in many jurisdictions. However, you've got a lot of uncertainty about which markets are going to be the most important. So as you learn more, you can drop applications off and correspondingly drop off the maintenance fees. For instance, if it's a medical device, there may be a lot of opportunity in countries with government-provided medical care programs to enter into high-volume license agreements with state health ministries. And so then they adopt this innovative technology for national distribution. Well, you might want to file an application there. At the same time, these same countries may exhibit poor long-term market dynamics and reduced opportunity once the agreement is in place. So maybe eventually you drop your rights. There may be a significant manufacturing opportunity in a country with very little medical demand, particularly if this is a cosmetic or a lifestyle related thing. However, in these cases, there may be a benefit to filing many national applications, all claiming priority back to the PCT, and then figuring this out later. You just slow roll the patent process in different countries, and eventually you abandon your efforts in the places where it doesn't make sense. Maybe you have an acquirer or an investor who has particular regional concerns later. Well, you've left the door open for them, and leaving these doors open for acquirers and investors helps your valuation today. Combining this strategy with good use of jurisdictional arbitrage can be doubly useful for warding off third-party competitors initially at the very beginning, and then you winnow down your ongoing maintenance fees as the revenue landscape coheres. Okay, this next point, 7 out of 8, this one's a little different. So your infringer might just be your friend. Many high-tech inventions rely on network effects. There's some capture principles associated with natural monopolies. Well, with hardware devices, there's more of a linear growth situation because someone actually has to buy a physical thing. So, as a hardware startup, you have luxuries that a network effect dominated startup lacks. You have the luxury of slow playing the development of your global portfolio using the methods we've talked about. And if you do this right with good risk minimization, it can be very useful then to silently monitor your infringers. This is where I say your infringer can be your friend. Silently monitor them while they invest in marketing and other consumer-facing awareness things, expending their own money to bring product awareness to the local market, educating the customer base on what this thing even does, and after the infringer has sunk a significant amount of sunk costs into developing a market and marketing the need for a solution to a problem, only then do you begin licensing and enforcement discussions. Done correctly and in compliance with whatever working requirements your particular jurisdiction has, your company has saved a significant amount of money on local marketing efforts. Alternatively, perhaps you just developed a new licensing partner in a new jurisdiction who's already opened and knows the market. Of course, in prime markets where you want to be the first mover, considerations are different. But this can be effective in secondary markets particularly. Now, going back to medical hardware, because this is something that I know a fair amount about, there are public policies against prohibiting certain types of things, like patenting a medical procedure and then trying to enforce against a doctor performing the procedure. Different things like that in different jurisdictions. Now, the scope of these is outside of this chat, but in jurisdictions where, for instance, patents for methods of medical treatment of a human body are prohibited, you have some workarounds. So don't be dissuaded by stories of patent ineligibility in certain countries. There are ways to satisfy the complex rules, and there's ways to achieve strong alternative protection. In the example I just gave of the medical procedure, perhaps you would protect an implantable device in a method of manufacturing it, but not a method of using it. So then, at some point, the hospital or other entity employing the doctor will have to purchase the device. The purchase transaction can be made a part of the infringing act rather than the actual procedure. So by carefully crafting your patent claims, you can still target people who are knocking off your product. So there we go. We've gone through 8 things that may help, that are specific to hardware technologies with the development of a global portfolio. Protecting hardware requires awareness of national borders, variations between the different intellectual property regimes of the different countries. For medical devices, there's medical tourism concerns in growing international economies. So these all work very effectively to help bring the philosophy of your protection policies out of the software world, where we hear so much exciting news coming out of the software world and out of the Bay Area, and into more of a more traditional or industrial type environment. Okay, that's all for today. Thank you for listening.